Please do welcome back Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Knighton, to give his keynote speech. Thank you very much, sir.
Susanna, thank you very much. And Dave, thank you, A, for being here, B, for giving such a great presentation. I am now starting to doubt the fact that I took out the animal videos from last year out of my presentation. As you heard yesterday, this is the last appearance for me as the Chief of the Air Staff at the Global Air and Space Chiefs Conference. And I'm going to miss it. This conference provides a fantastic opportunity for us to get to know each other, to build relationships, and most importantly, to share ideas. Combined with the Royal International Air Tattoo and the invitation to our crews, to our industry, and to our spouses, this always feels like a very special event. You might remember that 2 years ago, I showed this picture of Knighton and me on holiday in Greece as a mechanism to try to build a rapport relationship. I got in trouble because I hadn't cleared it with her before I showed it, but I'm doing it again. It'll be fine. And I wanted to start today by saying a huge thank you to the Global Air and Space Chief community for your friendship and support over the 2 years while I've been Chief, and particularly over the last year. Some of you know that Knighton wasn't at RIAT last year as she underwent some pretty aggressive form of chemotherapy. And that camaraderie and support I felt from this international community was incredible. And it's those bonds of friendship and understanding that will sustain us both in peacetime and in war. Now, I'm pleased to say Kate is doing well. She'll be back at the Royal International Air Tattoo. And for those of you who are wondering, she is still a divorce lawyer. So if she hands you her business card, you should be afraid. If she hands your spouse your business card, you need to be very, very afraid. 2 years ago, in 2023, when I stood on this stage, the war in Ukraine was just over a year old. My key conclusion was that after 3 decades of peace dividend and fighting impressive counter-terrorism campaigns globally, we, the Royal Air Force and other air forces, needed to change if we were going to avoid the kind of war that we saw playing out in Ukraine. Our response to this demand for change, intellectually, was to update our air operating concept. At the heart of it is this idea of decision superiority, supported by agility, integration, and resilience. Roll forward a year. Last year, we focused on deterrence. In whatever way you describe it, warfare is costly. And I argued that our job as military leaders was to stop these wars from starting. I also explained last year where our priorities lay in terms of developing the capabilities to ensure that we could deter the kind of fight that we've seen in Ukraine. It started with command and control, capabilities to counter the A2AD threat, integrated air and missile defense, and agile combat employment. And taking a leaf out of Dave's book, I also showed you this picture of my good friend Patrick Sanders shortly after he finished being the head of the British Army at Glastonbury. I'm pleased to say that Patrick has gone past his Glasto phase and is now a successful podcaster, and it's really good. I can really recommend it. But Patrick was in the news again last weekend with a slightly dodgy picture of him, but with a warning that we should heed as we think about the pace of change. As you heard from the Minister, last month, the UK published its Strategic Defence Review, a vision about making Britain safer, secure at home and strong abroad. And in it, it played back to us much of the logic and analysis that we've talked about in conferences like this for several years. As you've heard today, it focuses on warfighting readiness. It's clear about putting NATO first, using defence as an engine for growth, UK innovation driven by lessons from Ukraine, and a whole of society response. This is a radical shift for the UK. And all of that is before the Hague Summit, where many of our allies signed up to spend significantly more on defence. This is a watershed moment for the UK and the West. Throughout my whole career, defence budgets have shrunk. Armed forces have got smaller. I was at RAF Cranwell recently talking to our officer cadets about to graduate and come out into their next phase of training and into the Air Force. And I told them they were entering an Air Force that none of us have ever known. An Air Force where budgets are growing and numbers are increasing. Now, last year, I also talked about the high-low mix and its importance and autonomous collaborative platforms. And you've heard about that from the Minister this morning. And I got Jim Beck, our Director of Capability, who you saw yesterday, to promise in front of all of you that he would deliver the first of a family of ACPs that would improve the lethality and survivability of our crewed platforms. And I want to pay tribute to Jim today and to the wider team for delivering in April this year Storm Shroud. It's an impressive capability that was delivered with a different attitude towards risk, both in terms of its acquisition and in terms of the way it's operated. It was also delivered through collaboration between warfighters, traditional defence industry, and new entrants to it. I'm enormously proud of what Jim and the team and the wider team have done to deliver it. And I'm enormously pleased that what the SDR sets out is a direction of travel that we have been on as Air Forces for several years. But the SDR is clear, and I'm clear, that we have to do this quickly and that we can't do it on our own. To borrow a phrase from my great friend Jabba Stur, the Dutch chief, we need to be ready to fight tonight, tomorrow, and together. So these alliances that these conferences help build are incredibly important to us. And frankly, the alliance with the United States of America is the most important of all. Arthur Tedder and Tui Spatz, the first Chief of Staff for the US Air Force, forged a relationship during the Second World War that sustained them through peace. Today, the relationships we form in peacetime need to sustain us through war. And this year has seen us, many of us in this room, flying alongside our US friends and fighting alongside them globally. But it's not just about working together as allies. This evolving battle space demands that we work together across all 5 domains. And that's why that is the theme of this conference. How do we integrate air and space power into this evolving battle space? And I want to use 3 stories from the past, the present, and the future to illustrate why this is important and what lessons we might draw about how we do it. Now, looking around the room, I think quite a lot of us in the room will remember from our early days in our career the end of the Cold War. Now, every self-respecting junior officer would have read Tom Clancy's Red Storm Rising. In it, NATO faced the task of repelling Russian aggression from Eastern Europe through, or by, as Tom said, penetrating the most concentrated sand belt the world has ever seen. In Tom Clancy's day, that was a job for air forces. It required large packages of aircraft. It was what our flag exercise, red flag, green flag, maple flag, were all about, honing our large force employment skills. We relished the opportunity. We loved flying and fighting alongside the very best from other nations. I'm sure just a mention of it evokes warm memories of a time when it was the Air Force that we knew and loved, when we had more hair, slimmer waists, and we didn't groan when we got out of chairs. This was Air Power's World Cup. I was also going to say this was, for our American audience, it's like the World Series, but I found out that Donald Trump seems to recognize soccer is the more important game. And if you're going to have a world event, you do have to invite people from other countries to it. Just saying. Sorry, Dave. But this was a complex mission, and attrition was expected. In Tom Clancy's novel, more than a dozen of the most technologically advanced aircraft the West had were lost on just that first mission. In the 1980s, we had the mass to cope with that kind of level of attrition. And today, we know that this is going to require more than just brilliant air forces. Even the most ardent advocate of air power, Dave Deptula, agrees. In Tom Clancy's time, the other terrestrial domains lacked the tools to be able to really influence this fight. And space and cyber weren't even nascent capabilities. Today, not only is it feasible to integrate effects across multi-domains, it is essential. And this is hard. It's hard to do it on a national level. Trying to do it multinationally across a continent is exponentially more difficult. But it is the challenge of our generation. And our adversaries know that. They're trying to emulate us. Fortunately, however, they are showing us how not to do it. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, it looked like integrated multi-domain operations. You had two combined armies supported by strategic fires, tactical and strategic air power provided by VKS, land launch, sea launch, air launch, cruise missiles, electronic warfare, and critical space and cyber effects. Surely that was integrated. But the reality is Russia sees air power differently to the West. In the Western way of warfare, air power is at the heart of the way we fight. In Russia, it's about supporting the land campaign. And we know, as Justin Bronk and Dag Henriksson have pointed out, that Russia has always struggled to integrate air power and missions to deliver strategic effect. So in those first few hours and days after the war started, what we saw was Russia's actions were stovepiped. They were deconflicted in time and space, and fratricide, both electronically and kinetically, was commonplace. But 3 years and 1 million casualties later, Russia is learning. And we have to learn too. As General Patton said, untutored courage is useless in the face of educated bullets. Our job as air chiefs is to educate our aviators, our commanders, so that we are ready for the next storm rising. There's no way I could write it. I stood on this stage and said that Ukraine, we should not imagine that Ukraine is the way in which we would fight in the future. Ukraine is a 19th century war fought with 20th century tactics and 21st century weapons. What we need to do is fight a 21st century war with 21st century capability and 21st century thinking. Now, 2025 has given for us some examples of how this air-led innovation and integration can make a difference. We've heard about Ukraine's audacious attack against Russia's strategic assets. And operations in Iran have really shown us what exquisite air power integrated with other multi-domain effects can do at both the strategic and the campaign level. But when the war starts, we know that it's going to be a dynamic environment. And so whilst the tactics and the targets might be the same as they were in Tom Clancy's day, the threat has changed and the tactics need to change too. This breadth, scale, depth, coupled with 3 years of operational experience, mean that threat is much greater than it was in Tom Clancy's time. And so the tactics need to change, and we need an integrated approach. We need space, cyber, land, sea, and air to work together. So in space, we know space will deliver PNT. We know it'll deliver ISR. We know it'll deliver battle damage assessment. But it can also be used to disrupt our adversaries' communications. We can shield our own forces from their satellites. Cyber can disrupt and degrade C2 systems. The maritime environment might deliver fires or air defense. On the land domain, they might launch Storm Shroud, project special forces, or launch ATACMS against targets. If we get this right, we create control of the air. It might be limited in time and geography, but it opens up the opportunity for our forces to target and exploit other opportunities. But no plan survives contact with the enemy, and we need a mechanism to adapt and react to ensure that we're able to exploit opportunities and make the right decisions at the right time in this complex environment. In the UK, we've developed Nexus. It's our combat cloud. It will form part of the digital targeting web the Minister talked about this morning. And it's through that that we will deliver the tempo and deliver that all-domain C2. But C2 is about more than the network. It's about our commanders, our decision makers, and our training. And we've got a challenge in NATO in particular. How do we command and control in a dynamic environment, multi-domain operations, when we're structured by component and organized by component or geography? NATO's Land Component Commander argues that it's the Army's task. The Army should, alone, deal with the counter-A2AD threat in Kaliningrad. Now, he might be right in that specific environment, but it's not proven or tested. And it would be like me saying that actually it's air power that should be the sole force that blunts Russian attacks into NATO territory. We need to lift ourselves out of these historic rivalries and reductive arguments and think about how do we deliver truly integrated multi-domain effects. How do we set the board at risk in the way Dave suggested to make sure that we are ready for that next storm rising? Now, we can learn lessons from other campaigns and operations, and the next panel will talk about some of those. But I think we need to test, to train and educate our people. In the real world, exercises like Bamboo Eagle provide high-end, multi-domain, multinational, long-range exercises where we can test and test ourselves against these kind of scenarios. Red Flag has always been the kind of pinnacle air exercise. In this case, Red Flag was just the starter to the main course, which was exercise Bamboo Eagle. 175 aircraft from Canada, the UK, Australia, and the US in an operation that ranged right across the Indo-Pacific. But we don't just need to rely on the real world anymore. The synthetic environment provides us with opportunities to test and train in ways we've not been able to before. In the UK, we've developed Gladiator. It's a synthetic, multi-domain environment that connects national and international components so they can mission rehearse the most complex multi-domain operations that we are yet able to imagine. Earlier this year, or last year, at Exercise Cobra Warrior, the weather meant that we were unable to conduct some of the flying that we intended. It's quite a common thing in UK. And what we did was we flew the mission in Gladiator. The full Cameo flew real time. And then the combined synthetic and real picture that came from that was fed into the Ops Center, which allowed our C2 and ISR teams to test themselves as though it had been for real. We can no longer wait to find out what we know and adapt when the war starts. For those like Dave and Sean Harris who walked the corridors, the United States Air Force's School of Advanced Air and Space Power Studies, they'll see this quote. We need to provide those opportunities for our people so that they are ready for this next storm rising. The Americans have shown the way with Bamboo Eagle and the phenomenal capability off the coast of California. But I think we need something like this in Europe too. Somewhere where we can bring our armies, navies, and air forces together, where we can test the Land Component Commander's assertion that he can alone address the counter-A2AD task in Kaliningrad, and where we can find out how do we command and control multi-domain effects in NATO when we're organised by component. Now, we've talked and sat around the NATO Air Chiefs table about creating some airspace that we can turn on and off over the North Sea. But for our agencies and our airlines, it's all just a bit too difficult. Now, to be fair, North Sea might not be the right place. And our friends in Sweden and Finland have got a lot of space and are keen to help. And what I would like to do is to see our European air forces and NATO pool our resources and create that capacity and capability here in Europe. So let me sum up. We have to be ready for this next storm rising. We know it's going to be harder than it was in Tom Clancy's day. Fighting a bespoke, exquisite air campaign that's not integrated into this evolving battle space will lead to campaign failure. What we need is genuinely integrated multi-domain effects at the operational and the strategic level, not just at the tactical level where we know that we excel. How we do that is through thinking and practice. We can do some of that in the synthetic environment, and that also allows us an opportunity to exploit some of those tools that Keith and others talked about yesterday. But we need to do it in the real world too, so we can identify the frictions and fix them. And I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to this NATO conundrum about command and control and how we do that command and control, integrated action, and deliver multi-domain effects when we're organised by component. But the answer to it starts with thinking and practice. And it's through that that we'll be ready to deter, to fight, to win tonight, tomorrow, and together. Thank you very much.